The Lady of the Barge. Presented by Audiobook Ledger. Bills. Paper chase. Sailormen have their faults, said the night watchman frankly. I'm not denying of it. I used to ave myself when I was at sea, but being close with their money is a fault as can seldom be brought again 'em. I saved some money once. 2 golden sovereigns, owing to a hole in my pocket. Before I got another ship, I slept 2 nights on a doorstep and 'ad nothing to eat, and I found them 2 sovereigns in the lining. Oh, my coat when I was over 2,000 miles away from the nearest pub. I on why knew one miser all the years I was at sea. Thomas Geary is, name was, and we was shipmates aboard the bark Granada, homeward bound from Sydney to London. Thomas was a man that was getting into years 60, I think he was, and old enough to know better. He'd been saving hard for over 40 years, and as near as we could make out he was worth a matter, £600. He used to be fond of talking about it, and letting us know how much better off he was than any of the rest of us. We was about a month out from Sydney when old Thomas took sick. Bill Hicks said that it was owing to a halfpenny he couldn't account for, but Walter Jones, whose family was always ill and thought he knew a lot about it, said that he knew what it was, but he couldn't remember the name of it, and that when we got to London and Thomas saw a doctor, we should see as, he was right. Whatever it was, the old man got worse and worse. The skipper came down and gave him some physic and looked at his tongue, and then he looked at our tongues to see what the difference was. Then he left the cook in charge of him, and went off. The next day, Thomas was worse, and it was soon clear to everybody but him that he was slipping his cable. He wouldn't believe it at first, though the cook told him Bill Hicks told him, and Walter Jones had a grandfather that went off in just the same way. I'm not going to die, says Thomas. How can I die and leave all that money? It'll be good for your relations, Thomas says. Walter Jones. I ain't got any, says the old man. Well, your friends then. Thomas says Walter soft like. I ain't got any, says the old man, I in. Yes you have, Thomas, says Walter with a kind smile. I could tell you one you've got. Thomas shut his eyes at him and began to talk pitiful about his money and the odd work he'd had saving of it. And by, he got worse and didn't recognize us, but thought we was a pack of greedy drunken sailormen. He thought Walter Jones was a shark and told him so, and try all he could. Walter couldn't persuade him different. He died the day arter. In the morning he was whimpering about his money in and angry with Bill when he reminded him that he couldn't take it with him, and he made Bill promise that he should be buried just as he was. Bill tucked him up arter that, and when he felt a canvas belt tied round the old man's waist, he began to see what he was driving at. The weather was dirty that day, and there was a bit of sea running. Consequently all hands was on deck, and a boy about 16 used to help the steward down aft was looking arter Thomas. Me and Bill just run down to give a look at the old man in time. I am going to take it with me, Bill, says the old man. That's right, says Bill. My mind's easy now, says Thomas. I gave it to Jimmy to throw overboard for me. You says Bill, staring. That's right, Bill, says the boy. He told me to. It was a little packet o' banknotes. He gave me 2pence for doing it. Old Thomas seemed to be listening. His eyes was open, and he looked artful at Bill to think what a clever thing he'd done. Nobody's going to spend my money, he says. Nobody. We drew back from his bunk and stood staring at him. Then Bill turned to the boy. Go and tell the skipper, gone, he says, and mind for your own sake, don't to tell the skipper or anybody else that you've thrown all that money overboard. Why not, says Jimmy. Because you will be locked up for it, says Bill. You'd no business to do it. You've been and broke the law. It ought to have been left to somebody. Jimmy looked scared, and arter was gone. I turned to Bill and I looks at Im and I says, "What's the little game, Bill?" "Game," said Bill, snorting at me. "I don't want the poor boy to get into trouble. Do I, poor little chap? You was young yourself once." "Yes," I says, "but I'm me. A bit older now." "Bill, and unless you tell me what your little game is, I shall tell the skipper myself and the chaps too." Poor old Thomas told him to do it. So where's the boy to blame? "Do you think Jimmy did?" says Bill, screwing up his nose at me. "That little varmint is walking about worth 600 quid. Now, you keep your mouth shut, and I'll make it worth your while." Then I see Bill's game. "All right, I'll keep quiet for the sake of my half," I says, looking at Im. I thought he had choked, and the language he see fit to use was a'most as much as I could answer. "Very well then," he says, "at last halves it is. It ain't a robbery because it belongs to nobody, and it ain't to the boy as because he was told to throw it overboard." They buried poor old Thomas next morning, and arter, it was all over Bill put his and on the boy's shoulder as they walked for Ard, and he says, "Poor old Thomas has gone to look for his money," he says. "Wonder whether he'll find it. Was it a big bundle, Jimmy?" "No," says the boy, shaking his head. "They was £600 notes, and 2 sovereigns. And I wrapped the sovereigns up in the notes to make 'em sink. Fancy throwing money away like that. Bill seems a sin, don't he it?" Bill didn't answer him, and that afternoon, the other chaps below being asleep, we searched his bunk through and through without any luck, and at last Bill sat down and swore he must have got it about him. We waited till night, and when everybody was snoring hard, we went over to the boy's bunk and went all through his pockets and felt the linings, and then we went back to our side, and Bill said, "What a thought about Jimmy," in whispers. "He must have got it tied round his waist next to his skin like Thomas said," I says. We stood there in the dark whispering, and then Bill couldn't stand it any longer and he went over on tiptoe to the bunk again. He was trembling with excitement. And I wasn't much better when all of a sudden the cook sat up in his bunk with a dreadful laughing scream and called out that somebody was tickling him. I got into my bunk and Bill got into his, and we lay there listening while the cook, who was a terrible ticklish man, leaned out of his bunk and said, "What 'd he do if it happened again?" "Go to sleep," says Walter Jones. "You were dreamin'. Who do you think would want to tickle you?" "I tell you," says the cook, "somebody come over and tickled me with and the size of a leg o' mutton. I feel creepy all over." Bill gave it up for that night, but the next day he pretended to think Jimmy was getting fat, and he caught hold of him and prodded him all over. He thought he felt something round his waist, but he couldn't to be sure, and Jimmy made such a noise that the other chaps interfered and told Bill to leave him alone. For a whole week we tried to find that money and couldn't he, and Bill said it was a suspicious thing that Jimmy kept aft a good deal more than he used to, and he got an idea that the boy might ha hidden it somewhere there. At the end of that time, however, owing to our being short-handed, Jimmy was sent for Ard to work as ordinary seaman, and it began to be quite noticeable the way he avoided Bill. At last one day we got him alone down the Foe Sea Slee, and Bill put his arm round Im and got him on the locker and asked him straight out where the money was. "Why, I chucked it overboard," he says. "I told you so afore." What a memory you've got, Bill. Bill picked him up and laid him on the locker, and we searched him thoroughly. We even took his boots off, and then we had another look in his bunk while he was putting him on again. "If you re innocent," says Bill, "why don't you call out A?" "Because you told me not to say anything about it." "Bill," says the boy. "But I will next time." Loud, "I will." "Look 'ere," says Bill. "You tell us where it is, and the 3 of us'll go shares in it. That'll be £200 each, and we'll tell you how to get yours changed without getting caught. We're cleverer than you are, you know." "I know that, Bill," says the boy, "but it's no good me telling you lies. I chucked it overboard." "Very good then," says Bill, getting up. "Am I going to tell the skipper?" Tell him, says Jimmy. I don't care. Then you will be searched. Arthur, you've stepped ashore, says Bill, and you want to be allowed on the ship ag in. You will lose it all by being greedy, whereas if you go shares with us you will have £200. I could see as, ow the boy hadn't he thought oh, that and try as, would, couldn't he is feelin' s. He called Bill a red-nosed shark. And called me something I've forgotten now. Think it over, says Bill. Mind you'll be collared as soon as you've left the gangway and searched by the police. And will they tickle the cook too? I wonder, says Jimmy savagely. And if they find it, you'll go to prison, says Bill, giving him a clump of the side of the eed, and you want to like that I can tell you. Why ain't he it? Nice Bill, says Jimmy holding his ear. Bill looked at him and then steps to the ladder. I'm not going to talk to you any more, my lad, says. I'm going to tell the skipper. He went up slowly, and just as reached the deck, Jimmy started up and called him. Bill pretended not to hear, and the boy ran up on deck and followed him and Arthur a little while. They both came down again together. Did you wish to speak to me, my lad, says Bill holding his head up. Yes, says the boy fiddling with his fingers. If you keep your ugly mouth shut, we'll go shares. Ho, says Bill. I thought you throwed it overboard. I thought so too. Bill, says Jimmy very softly, and when I came below again, I found it in my trousers pocket. Where is it now, says Bill. Never mind where it is, says the boy. You couldn't get it if I was to tell you. It'll take me all my time to do it myself. Where is it, says Bill again. I'm going to take care of it. Ooh, I won't trust you. And I can too trust you, says Jimmy. If you don't tell me where it is this minute, says Bill moving to the ladder in I am off to tell the skipper. I want it in my hands, or at any rate my share of it. Why not share it out now? Because I haven't got it, says Jimmy, stamping his foot. That why and it's all your silly fault. Arthur, you came pawing through my pockets when you thought I was asleep. I got frightened and did it. Where, says Bill. In the second mate's mattress, says Jimmy. I was tidying up down aft, and I found a hole in the underneath side of his mattress, and I shoved it in there and poked it in with a bit of stick. And ow. Are you going to get it, says Bill, scratching his head. That's what I don't know, seeing that I'm not allowed aft now, says Jimmy. One of us'll have to make a dash for it when we get to London. And mind if there's any hanky-panky on your part. Bill, I'll give the show away myself. The cook came down just then, and we had to leave off talking, and I could see that Bill was so pleased at finding that the money hadn't been thrown overboard that he was losing sight of the difficulty of getting at it. In a day or two, however, see it as plain as me and Jimmy did, and as time went by, he got discreet and frightened us both by hanging about aft every chance he got. The companionway faced the wheel, and there was about as much chance of getting down there without being seen as there would be taking a man's false teeth out of his mouth without his knowing it. Jimmy went down one day while Bill was at the wheel to look for his knife what he thought Edie left down there, and Edie hardly got down afore Bill saw him come up and holding onto the top of a mop which the steward was using. We couldn't figure it out nohow, and to think of the second mate, a little man with a large family who never had a penny in his pocket, sleeping every night on a £600 mattress, sent us pretty near crazy. We used to talk it over whenever we got a chance, and Bill and Jimmy could scarcely be civil to each other. The boy said it was Bill's fault, and he said it was the boy's. The only thing I can see, says the boy one day, is for Bill to have a touch of sunstroke as es leaving the wheel one day, tumble eat first down the companionway, and injure myself so severely that he can to be moved. Then they'll put him in a cabin down aft and P-raps. I'll have to go and nurse him. Anyway, he'll be down there. It's a very good idea, Bill one says. Ho, says Bill, looking at me as if he would eat me. Why don't you do it then? I'd sooner you did it. Bill says, the boy still. I don't mind which it is. Why not toss up for it? Get away, says Bill. Get away afore I do something. You want he like you bloodthirsty little murderer. I've got a plan myself, he says in a low voice after the boy had hopped off. And if I can think of nothing better, I'll try it, and mind not a word to the boy. He didn't think, oh, nothing better, and one night, just as we was making the channel, he tried his plan. He was in the second mate's watch, and by he leans over the wheel and says to him in a low voice, "This is my last VYG, sir." "Oh," says the second mate, who was a man as didn't mind. Talking to a man before the mast. "Who's that?" "I've got a berth ashore, sir," says Bill, "and I wanted to ask a favour, sir." The second mate growled and walked off a pace or two. "I've never been so happy as I've been on this ship," says Bill. "None of us have. We was saying so the other night. And everybody agreed as it was owing to you, sir, and your kindness to all of us." The second mate coughed, but Bill could see as he was a bit pleased. "The feeling came over me," says Bill, "that when I leave the sea for good, I'd like to have something o' yours to remember you by, sir. And it seemed to me that if I had your mattress, I should think of you every night o' my life." "My what?" says the second mate, staring at him. "Your mattress, sir," says Bill. "If I might make so bold as to offer £1 for it, sir. I want something what's been used by you, and I've got a fancy for that as a keepsake." The second mate shook his head. I'm sorry, Bill," he says gently, "but I couldn't let it go at that. I'd sooner pay 30 shillings than not have it, sir," says Bill humbly. "I gave a lot of money for that mattress," says the mate in. "I forget how much, but a lot. You don't know how valuable that mattress is." "I know it's a good one, sir, else you wouldn't have it," says Bill. "Would a couple of pounds buy it, sir?" The second mate hummed and hawed. But Bill was afeard to go any higher. So far as he could make out from Jimmy, the mattress was worth about 18 pence to anybody who wasn't particular. "I've slept on that mattress for years," says the second mate, looking at him from the corner of his eye. "I don't believe I could sleep on another. Still, to oblige you, Bill, you shall have it at that if you don't want it till we go ashore." "Thank ye, sir," says Bill, hardly able to keep from dancing, "and I owe and over the £2 when we repaid off. I shall keep it all my life, sir, in memory of you and your kindness. And mind you keep quiet about it," says the second mate, who didn't want the skipper to know what he'd been doing, "because I don't want to be bothered by other men wanting to buy things as keepsakes." Bill promised I'm like a shot, and when he told me about it, he was nearly crying with joy. "And mind, he says, I've bought that mattress, bought it as it stands, and it's got nothing to do with Jimmy. We'll each pay £1.50 what's in it." He persuaded me at last, but that boy watched us like a cat watching a couple of canaries, and I could see we should have all we could do to deceive him. He seemed more suspicious o' Bill than me, and he kept worrying us nearly every day to know what we were going to do. We beat about in the channel with a strong east wind for 4 days, and then a tug picked us up and towed us to London. The excitement of that last little bit was horrible. First of all, we had got to get the mattress, and then in some way we had got to get rid of Jimmy. Bill's idea was for me to take him ashore with me and tell him that Bill would join us afterwards and then lose him, but I said that till I'd got my share, I couldn't bear to lose sight o' Bill's honest face for half a second. And besides, Jimmy wouldn't have gone. All the way up the river he stuck to Bill and kept asking him what we were to do. He was half crying, and so excited that Bill was afraid the other chaps would notice it. We got to our berth in the East India docks at last, and arter we were made fast. We went below to have a wash and change into our shore-going togs. Jimmy watched us all the time, and then he comes up to Bill, biting his nails, and says, How's it to be done, Bill? Hang about arter the rest. Have ye gone ashore and trust to luck, says Bill, looking at me. We'll see how the land lays when we draw our advance. We went down aft to draw 10 shillings each to go ashore with. Bill and me got ours first, and then the second mate who had tipped in the wink followed us out, unconcerned like, and handed Bill the mattress rolled up in a sack. "'Ere you are," Bill says. "Much obliged, sir," says Bill, and his hands trembled so as he could hardly hold it, and he made to go off afore Jimmy come on deck. Then that fool of a mate kept us there while he made a little speech. Twice Bill made to go off, but he put his and on his arm and kept him there while he told him how he'd always tried to be liked by the men and had generally succeeded, and in the middle of it up popped Master Jimmy. He gave a start as he saw the bag and his eyes opened wide, and then as we walked forward, he put his arm through Bill's and called him all the names he could think of. "You do steal the milk out of a cat saucer," he says. "But mind you don't leave this ship till I've got my share. I meant it for a pleasant surprise for you." "Jimmy," says Bill, trying to smile. "I don't like your surprises, Bill. So I don't deceive you," says the boy. "Where are you going to open it?" "I was thinking of opening it in my bunk," says Bill. "The perlice might want to examine it if we took it through the dock." "Come on, Jimmy, old man." "Yes, all right," says the boy, nodding his head at him. "I'll stay up here. You might forget yourself, Bill, if I trusted myself down there with you alone. You can throw my share up to me, and then you'll leave the ship afore I do." "Go to blazes," says Bill. And then, seeing that the last chance had gone, we went below, and he chucked the bundle in his bunk. There was only one chap down there, and arter spending best part o' 10 minutes doing his hair, he nodded to us and went off. Half a minute later, Bill cut open the mattress and began to search through the stuffing while I struck matches and watched him. It wasn't a big mattress, and there wasn't much stuffing, but we couldn't seem to see that money. Bill went all over it, ag in, and then he stood up and looked at me and caught his breath painful. "Do you think the mate found it?" he says in a husky voice. We went through it again, and then Bill went halfway up the faux CS ladder and called softly for Jimmy. He called 3 times, and then with a sinking sensation in his stomach, he went up on deck, and I followed him. The boy was nowhere to be seen. All we saw was the ship's cat having a wash and brush up before going ashore, and the skipper standing aft talking to the owner. We never saw that boy ag in. He never turned up for his box, and didn't he show up to draw his pay. Everybody else was there, of course, and arter I'd got mine and come outside, I see poor Bill with his back up agin a wool, staring hard at the second mate, who was looking at him with a kind smile and asking him how he'd slept. The last thing I saw of Bill, the poor chap had got his hands in his trousers pockets and was trying his hardest to smile back.